Welcome to the True North Fantasy Football Podcast.
What up, fantasy people? Welcome back to the True North Fantasy Pod. Trav here from True North, and as always, I'm rocking in Dirty Laundry Studios. And of course, I've got my co-host Tyrell McLaughlin with me. Ty, what's cracking, dude?
Same old, same old.
Yep, gonna be a good show tonight. You can find Ty dropping killer stats and information on Twitter at TNFF Tyrell, and you can find me at TSEAL14. So Ty, tonight we are going to get it rolling quick because we have another fantastic guest on the evening, and I can't wait to dive into this show. This is someone that we've got a ton of respect for and whose content has become a foundational resource for tons of us in the fantasy industry, definitely in my process. Ty, I know yours as well. He's previously worked for NFL.com, CBS, a bunch of other big name sites. And he's now a co-owner and head of analytics for the all-pro team over at Fantasy Points. That would be Graham Barfield. Graham, how you doing tonight, man?
Yo, I'm doing good, guys. Thanks for having me on. This is, it's a lot of fun. We were just rapping about the season and, getting prepared now for the off season. It's always kind of a fun transition mode. So excited to talk to you guys tonight.
Yeah, man, it's going to be good. It's going to be good.
I'm not gonna make Graham run down like his life story or anything, but honestly, with all the early age-adjusted production in the fantasy industry, pretty much the Randy Moss or Justin Jefferson of analysts, and I think it is awesome. Like, seriously, congratulations. As of 2020, Trav alluded to it off the top, co-owner Fantasy Points. I think it's more than just kind of an eye-watering story when you think of how you guys were able to put this together in such a controversial year. But it really is an elite resource. Like, the team you guys have built is unreal. I can't name them all, but some of the best data divers, namely you, but a guy like Scott Barrett is legendary to me. John Hansen, Adam Kaplan. You guys have the accuracy guru, if you will, in Joe Dolan, fellow Eagles fan. Trav, you guys have Tom Broly for the betting side of things. Greg Cosell, who, gets football like you do, breaks it down like nobody does. Dr. Edwin Porras as well is actually my go-to guy for injury. So I'm pretty much out of breath. Holy, I didn't even name half the Fantasy Points crew. So what's it like, Graham, being able to bounce ideas off brains like that? Do you guys make each other better analysts, better gamers?
Absolutely. This past year, I think, it's definitely, we were talking a little bit before the show about this, but this past year was what it was, and we weren't sure if we were going to get a season, but it kind of made it easier working with those guys because I've worked with John and Joe and Tom and our guy, Ben Kukanis, who, Ben Kukanis is the MVP of the site, by the way. He's our basically director of operations, but he does everything for the site. He edits, he posts all the articles, and we've all been friends and coworkers back from the Fantasy Guru days from 2016. So it was kind of it's just an easy transition back over. So that definitely made it easier. But yeah, getting Greg Cosell more involved and getting Adam Kaplan more involved and getting Scott on the team. Scott was just legendary for the DFS side of things this year. And he did an amazing job with offseason stuff too. It's just, it's a really, really cool team. And I'm just grateful to be a part of it.
It's a fantasy draft of fantasy analysts over there. Actually, I was just mentioning Dr. Edwin Porras. It reminds me of a different doctor. I was listening to the Fantasy Hustle, Dwayne McFarlane and Brian Drakestiddy a few weeks ago. Their guest was Dr. Abib Egbatoba. If people don't know who Dr. Abib Egbatoba is, he won the high-stakes fantasy football guys players championship this year. He's won it back-to-back years. That's a $500,000 first place prize this year. So anyways, they were having a great conversation about process, which I mentioned because you want to emulate this dude's process. And Dr. Abib name dropped Fantasy Points as one of his top resources. T-Rav,
hey,
we need an endorsement like that, man. 100% of rich doctors recommend Fantasy Points. That's great money.
Yeah, we'll try and find that. We'll make sure we earn it, just like the fellows over at Fantasy Points have done over the years as well. Yeah,
so, that's awesome. By the way, Edwin is the nicest dude ever, and he's just such an amazing. He gives such a good I don't know. I think a lot of injury experts, and I don't want to shit on anybody, but definitely get a little hot takey, and Edwin always sticks to the data, and I always appreciate that with him. But I'm gonna have to check out that show with Brian and Dwayne. I'm big fans of those guys. I have not listened to that one yet, so I'll have to go check them out.
Yeah, we don't like to brag or anything, but we did have Edwin on the pod a while back, before he was big, No, he's an incredible guy. And Ty, just realized we're on episode 74 right now. So it's crazy how time flies, because Edwin was probably in like the episode 20 something. So it's been a while. We'll have to get him back on the show for sure. But tonight, before we jump into the content, gentlemen, we are, of course, presented by Monkey Knife Fight. This is the fastest growing DFS platform in the biz. They've got player props for all skill levels and a wide range of buy-ins to maximize that profit. And with our deal with Monkey Knife Fight, if you use our promo code TNFF on your first deposit, you'll get an instant match of up to $50. So yeah, we really appreciate everybody who has signed up as of yet. It helps us a lot. And yeah, if you want to go sign up, like I said, the promo code is TNFF, and you can get an instant match of up to $50. And that's not restricted just to football. They've got golf props, they've got UFC stuff, basketball, baseball, you name it. So there's tons of fun to be had on Monkey Knife Fight year round. And I also like that it makes it easy for all skill levels, because even like my wife and I can jump in and we can see a passing yardage prop, and we can just kind of go in whether we think it's going to be more or less or whatever it may be. So thanks to everybody who signed up, and thanks to Monkey Knife Fight for all they do for us. We really appreciate that.
It's about golf betting time, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, baby.
Yeah, that's your real, I would say.
Yeah, who are you guys on this week?
I have no idea. I haven't even really dug into. Yeah, I haven't dug into
okay.
the past some of the past tournament performances, but it's gonna be. I just kind of thinking about the whole season. It's gonna be hard to knock DJ off. I think there's a handful of guys.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful for
DJ. I'm pulling hard for DJ Repate at the Masters.
Same here.
I've been a huge DJ fan for so long, and I think it'd be so
Me
dope
too.
if he came back, because that course is perfectly suited for him. That'd be awesome if he could do back to
He's
back.
cheating on that course, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
He's incredible. I've been rooting for him for a long time as well.
He
Golf
just
is like too much fun to keep track of.
Yeah.
And just DJ, for the longest time, he just couldn't get over that hump. I think he has finally made that transition into that elite tier where he's ready to kind of defend that number one status now. That's what I hope.
Okay, do you guys think it was a sand trap back in the day, or was that dirt that he was hitting the ball off of that lost him that first major? You remember that big controversy when he was super young, where it was like trampled ground?
Oh,
and
yeah.
he grounded his club in a sand trap, but there was no way that was a sand trap.
No, clearly. I mean, he grounded, because that's when, like you get those weird lies where, where the fans are at and stuff. But yeah, he got unlucky there. He also got unlucky at Chambers Bay. I mean, he missed that putt, when Spieth was in there, and I mean, he dominated that course at Chambers that whole year, and all 4 rounds really. And it's good to see him finally winning majors, because he's always been a guy, someone who should have 5, 6, 7 of them.
Yeah, he's a monster. So to
Adam
get into
Spieth
it here,
I was going to say Adam Spieth was the guy I always called the Adam Gase of golf. Just that dead slow pace. That dead slow pace.
Yeah, his fall from grace was pretty steep. I hope he can kind of get back into contention, because he was pretty exciting to watch too. Like very, very tactical and very accurate too. So, but moving into football, gentlemen.
Downfall next.
Yeah. Last week we talked a little bit about the playoff matchups. It's not going to be the meat and potatoes of the episode, but we did go over the matchups last week when we had Ian Hartitz on the show. So Graham, we are going to do the same with you, and we are going to talk about these playoff matchups that we have coming up this weekend. And we're going to pick them against the spread. So the first game we got is the Bucs at the Packers. The Packers are a 3-point favorite. There's lots of talk about Tom Brady playing in that cold weather, which is something that he has done a ton. Then we got the Bucs run defense looking to slow down Aaron Jones, who is awesome. And then you got AJ Dillon, Jamal Williams peppering in as well. What are you thinking, Graham? I'm curious to see how you think this one's going to go, because that Bucs passing defense played really well against the Saints last week. But I think Aaron Rodgers and the Packers is probably a bit of a different ballgame.
Yeah, it is. And I think, a little bit of it was just Drew Brees being on the clear downswing of his career. Obviously, he was dealing with so many injuries too between the ribs, and apparently he had like some sort of shoulder issue. There's been a lot of talk too about that week 6 game where it was Rodgers' only bad game this year. Like if you look at the numbers, look deep into the Just even watching that game, it was really the only game where he struggled. And, Todd Bowles, all credit to him. He did an incredible job blitzing him. I don't know how much that game matters though now. I mean, we're talking about a game that happened, in mid-October. It's now, late November, late January. And I think, the Bucs secondary late in the year started giving up a ton of yards to perimeter wide receivers. And obviously, no one can cover Devontae Adams. He's just been an absolute cheat code. I think, honestly, I'm pretty surprised that the Bucs are getting this much respect, especially with the Packers #1 seed at home. I'd be on the Packers side pretty strongly. Just, Brady was phenomenal, especially to end the year, and he was great again last week, just super efficient, moving the ball downfield, especially after their first couple drives where they started shaky. But man, I'm not betting against the Packers and in that offense right now. I think I think they'll learn from the previous mistakes. Rodgers will get the ball out a little bit quicker, and we'll see a little bit better offense from the Packers this time.
Mm-hmm. I thought it would have been a little bit more than 3 points for the Packers as well. Yeah. Ty, what do you think? How do you think this shakes out?
Yeah, I mean, I could play a little bit of devil's advocate just in the sense of where I think people are coming from landing on Tampa Bay in this game. And I think it does have a lot or too much to do, to Graham's point, about week 6. I mean, that was a really bad game for Rodgers. The only game without a touchdown all season. Uncharacteristically, multiple interceptions in that game. Since 2017, Aaron Rodgers has only had 2 games with multiple interceptions, week 6 against the Buccaneers. The other time was in last year's NFC playoff game against the 49ers. When, you think of Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers is hungry in this identical spot last year and failed. I think that's kind of why, he just has that fire in his belly. And Brady obviously has that built into his belly, but I think my point would be that Green Bay, they're not infallible. Aaron Rodgers isn't infallible. And a little bit we have seen the blueprint how to beat the Packers team. You have to do to them what they do to other teams, and that's dominate in terms of time of possession. If Tampa Bay took that route, that usually lends to the run game. So too does cold weather. And if we think back to that first meeting between these two teams, Tom Brady did not have a very good outing in that game. It was a ton of Ronald Jones on the ground, over 100 yards rushing, 2 scores in that game. Packers defense, pretty much a run funnel defense too. So if Ronald Jones is healthier, if they can mix in Fournette and Keyshawn Vaughn, they could frustrate the Packers. I just think the way they would win is the Bucs could be a more balanced offense because we know they have an abundance of weapons in that passing game too. That totally is kind of the rose-colored glasses though, because I really agree with Graham. That game in week 6 was a long time ago. This game is in Lambeau. That game was in Tampa Bay, and Green Bay's 8-1 at home this year. And just coming back to the fact that he's totally Aaron Rodgers is hard to stop when he's on his game. Sure, the Bucs are the #1 run defense, but they really have, to Graham's point, fallen off during the regular season against the pass. And I think that's kind of why I like the over in this game too. These are 2 of the 3 highest scoring offenses from the regular season too. So I'll take Green Bay to cover, and I kind of like the over too.
Yeah, I'm in the same camp there. I think Green Bay gets it done. I think Devontae Adams is just kind of a different animal right now, especially with that fire in the belly, like you were saying, Ty. So moving on to the Bills and the Chiefs. The Bills obviously go to Kansas City. Kansas City is a 3-point favorite over the Bills right now as well. The Bills just got past the Ravens last week, and the Chiefs beat the Browns, and there was definitely some turmoil around that game with Patrick Mahomes getting his bell rung. That was a super weird play. It was kind of tough to watch him getting up and stumbling there. And Chad Henne finished the game, which is not something we ever expected. So it's looking like Mahomes is good to go this week. So, Graham, I'm curious if you think the Bills are going to give them a run for their money or if it's going to be wheels up for that Chiefs offense.
Yeah, I think they will. If we get Mahomes, which it sounds like we will, Reed said he did, kind of something limited on the side of the day. I think we'll get Mahomes, and I think this game is going to go nuts. The teams, there are 2 teams, I think, in the NFL that can run with the Chiefs, and the Bills are definitely one of them. You got to match Mahomes. You got to go blow for blow with him, and you got to throw the hell out of the ball because you know what the Chiefs are going to do. Even on a bad day, this offense is going to score at least 3 or 4 touchdowns. And Allen and the Bills, in terms of any game script, when they're trailing, when they're ahead, situation neutral, they have been top 3, top 4 in pass rate. I'm fully expecting them to come out and throw the hell out of the ball against the Chiefs and try to put up points. And, I think this game is going to be a little bit tighter than Bucs Packers. I actually think the Packers are I think they're much stronger favorites than -3. Chiefs, I think the Bills definitely deserve this 3-point spread. I mean, just, Allen in this offense has just been unstoppable basically since week 9. They've put up last week was really their only dud game, and that was maybe because it was the cold weather. Allen definitely missed some throws, and Ravens defense is really solid, but no weather concerns in this spot. I think we're going to see a ton of points, and I think I'm on Bills +3. I really don't. I mean, it's hard to bet against Mahomes and the Chiefs, but I think I'm on Bills on the Bills side, and definitely love the over here too. I mean, it's only 54 points. I mean, last week we saw, it was last week we saw a spread of 57. I think this game should be closer to 56, 57. So I'm on Bills and the over here.
I like it. It would be hard. It would be really hard to pull the trigger going against Mahomes and the Chiefs, but I think it could definitely pay off with the evolution of that Bills offense, like you said. Ty, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for the matchup. I think it's probably the best team in football for the last couple of years against the hottest team in football right now. And I think the difference is probably some of the health concerning the Chiefs' offensive weapons, right? So, I think the reason, this is 2 of the 3 high-scoring offenses, 2 of the 3 best passing attacks, to Graham's point, across the board this season in almost any metric you look at. So, I think the reason that people aren't hammering the over, or why it's not a 60-point total at this point, is just that this is also the second meeting between teams who played in week 6. And the previous matchup that was highly anticipated at the time had a 55-point total. I think it ended up turning out that only 43 points were scored in that game. Kansas City won a lower scoring affair, 26-17. Could point out that, that was during that little weird spell of the Bills. I think there was some weather in that game as well, if I can remember. But the funny thing is, to me, looking towards the game for Sunday, almost everything that we should expect to unfold was not what we saw play out in that first game. So we do have to throw most of that first game out. And that first point off of that would be Clyde Helaire, who we are going to ask Graham about. I'm very excited later in the program, but it's unclear if he's going to suit up for this one. And I know he hasn't gone off very many times this year, but he went off as fuck against the Bills in week 6. Conveniently, just as the Chiefs had signed Le'Veon Bell, if we remember. Second off, I think the Bills might be having Travis Kelce nightmares. I think that's the one guy they're not going to be able to stop for, nobody has been able to. And that included Buffalo in week 6. Both Mahomes touchdowns in that game went to Kelce, and the Bills have really struggled against the tight end position this year. The only reason that I'm not smashing the Bills, even though I think I am taking the Bills because they're getting points here, is because, man alive, Josh Allen and the Bills really struggled against Kansas City's defense earlier in the year. And, the time of possession battle is what I noticed in that game. Chiefs won almost 38 minutes to 22 minutes for the Bills. But my point is, I won't be shocked if the Bills offense doesn't live up to the hype, whereas I'll be more shocked if the Chiefs don't. Basically, I think Buffalo has to make sure they stop the run game. They still have to contend with Mahomes, which is next to impossible. And then on offense, they need to make sure they come out and have a polar opposite performance from the one they had against Kansas City earlier in the season. But I will take the Chiefs, and I think I'm going to stay away from the total personally.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Chiefs, and I think I do like the over because I think some points will be put up in this one. But regardless, I'm excited for this playoff football because we've got some really good games on tap. It's going to be fun to playoffs are always nice because you always have the DFS and whatnot, but it's a little bit more lax because we can just chill on those 1,700 rosters that we have to set and all that stuff. So I personally have liked the wind down in obligations as we moved into the playoffs here. Ty, why don't you move us into the next segment though, my man?
Absolutely. I want to get into some yards created talk. That is why we have the man of the hour, the inventor, on the show. So I imagine, Graham, we're going to ask you a follow-up question or two because really it's so much more than just a stat or a metric, in my opinion. But for somebody who's maybe never heard of it, would you want to explain exactly what is yards created?
Sure. Yeah. So yards created is something I started now 5 years ago. And like brass tacks, it's basically just what happens after the offensive line has or has not done its job. And I only do this for college running backs, just mainly because I don't have the time to do NFL backs in the summer because I'm ramping up for fantasy. But yeah, I mean, yards created is the best way to think of it. It's not yards after contact. It's basically second level yards. So what happens if the offensive line does its job and if the running back follows this blocking scheme and gets into the second level, what happens in that space? Or vice versa, let's say the offensive line gets blown up. Is that running back creating yards for himself behind the line of scrimmage and potentially ripping off a big gain? So that's basically the nuts and bolts of yards created. It's also stemmed out into a bunch of other different things. I'm watching every single passing down snap too. So I'm charting yards per route run, different types of routes run. I'm charting pass blocking snaps, missed tackles forced on the ground and through the air. So it's kind of become like an all-encompassing kind of look at these running backs. And yeah, I think it, I started it as kind of like I wanted to be more of like a descriptive thing. Like, hey, this is just like a cool data point to look at and point at. But I think it's turned into something a little bit more, which is really cool.
No, it's certainly blown up. And I think the specificity, the attention to detail is a big reason for that. Like what I love about it is that it measures a lot of metrics that translate to the NFL. I think that's like a big point of it. Like I'm sure you, probably Scott Barrett too, get asked constantly, what are the stats that matter most? Which metrics correlate to running back success for fantasy? I think the funniest way you could answer that question is by saying the stats that are used in yards created to compile yards created. And that's kind of the whole point to me. It's more than just a stat, it's more than just a tool. Like, yeah, it separates running back play from offensive line play. It introduces us to more advanced metrics right off the top. And personally, it's been as much about that, being in the know, it's as much about the numbers as like the fantasy epiphanies you can have once you dive into some of the yards created work, because we do notice ideas like the ability to make defenders miss, the 3-to-1 pass catching rule in PPR. Those are all things that are becoming more and more universally embraced, I think. And I actually think that folks like you, Graham, and Scott Barrett, you guys deserve a lot of credit for enlightening the fantasy industry, because those are concepts that you've championed over the years. One of the first people I kind of heard talking about that shit, because, knowing how you approach the position, the ingredients that go into your work, it makes it so easy to trust your work. And in turn, all of a sudden, we have this fantastic measuring stick that we never had before, a way to gauge rookie running backs, Mo Betta, a position that we know is so important, as important as it's ever been for fantasy. Like, I know I'm around, but for our listeners, like think of a running back behind a poor offensive line or a good running back behind a really good offensive line. Well, now we have this tool that lets us almost gauge how strong that relationship was between the two. Or like running back efficiency will never be totally detached from offensive line play, but I think yards created goes a long way to kind of divorcing the running back from their situation, if that makes sense. And I could just use names from this 2020 class. Like Jonathan Taylor was the latter, right? His yards created told us that he was much more than just a product of that Badgers offensive line, or a guy like Cam Akers, who was behind an unbelievably bad line. You read that yards created profile, and Graham's provided tons of context. He's also taking you to school probably about yards after contact or something. So, sorry to just ramble and gush here. Maybe Trav, like how many times have we talked about rookie running backs who are always tightly bunched in a tier, and how often does yards created come up,
Totally. I think it's just like I'd echo everything you said there, Ty. The fact that it kind of separates you from that. You look at like a Cam Akers who had that awful offensive line at FSU. And I think, Ty, like the moral of the story is that just anybody who is watching this should definitely be following Graham on Twitter at Graham Barfield and stay up to date on all the work at fantasypoints.com. Graham, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you guys have an early bird special on subscription right now where it is a significant chunk off. So definitely would recommend that as a resource for sure.
Beautiful setup. Yeah, it's 30% off right now. You can you can get the season long package, or you can get the whole premium deal for 30% off. You get access to in-season DFS, a bunch of our advanced stats and stuff that we're coming out with. We have a slew of new stuff we're going to come out with this summer, a bunch of new tools. So really excited for that. Yeah, co-sell draft guides up for $25 right now. Anybody, you can get that with a free account. So if you have a free account, you get in. You don't have to have a premium access or anything like that. You can just sign up for a free account. It's only $25 for literally the best draft guide you can find, and probably the best bang for your buck too.
Yeah, that's a great point too. $25 for such a well-respected guy to put a draft guide together is just an incredible price point for that. Ty, you were talking about those rookies there. the 2020 class, as well as the 2017 class. Those were two that were particularly big hits for the running back position. And Graham, you were very vocal about that, telling people that they need to acquire these running backs in their rookie drafts. Obviously, it's backed up by the yards created data that you compiled. And if people listened, they most likely made out like bandits, because coming into 2021 right now, the two classes, the 2017 and 2020 class, make up a majority of our top 24 running backs, essentially. And we're going to start by kicking into this 2020 class and talking about some of these guys who are, I guess now we can call them sophomores. I'm not sure. But first, I just want to ask you, Graham, with all the stuff you compiled, were you even surprised with the output that we saw in 2020? Or did you kind of expect the explosion that we did see? Because it was pretty wild.
Just with the rookie class, or with just the fantasy landscape as a whole?
The 2020 rookies coming in, and how we saw like 7 of them produce like pretty good numbers.
Yeah. Obviously I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire was probably the biggest disappointment. I think the process was right on that, especially early in drafts before Damien Williams got, set out for the season because of, COVID concerns with his family. Edwards-Helaire was probably the biggest disappointment. But yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Jonathan Taylor and Akers and Swift all kind of cemented themselves as like, yeah, we know who these guys are, especially late in the year. Jonathan Taylor was top 3 running back. He was right behind Derrick Henry and David Montgomery in fantasy points per game over his last 6-7 games. J.K. Dobbins, when they finally decided, hey, we just should make this a 2-man backfield between Dobbins and Gus Edwards, we saw the explosiveness that we always saw at Ohio State, the second level ability, to make guys miss at the second level and get to the second level in a hurry. I think debating this class for 2021 drafts is going to be really interesting, because I think we're going to see Taylor, just based on, and for good reason, Taylor based on his finish to last year. I think he's going to end up being probably a first-round pick. He's probably going to be a top 6 or 7 pick in terms of overall running back selections. I think we'll probably see Akers at 2. He obviously ended the year really strong, getting all the touches there, and Darrell Henderson was hurt too. And then we'll see probably Dobbins and Swift in some sort of similar tier. But yeah, I think in a lot of ways, all 4 of those guys kind of cemented themselves. Antonio Gibson, I think, is the true outlier, though, man. He only had 40 carries in college, but on those carries, he would have led that 2020 class in missed tackles forced per attempt by a landslide. I mean, we saw it on the little limited carries. We always knew he was a great pass catcher, but the fact that he came in and he looked, I watched early in the year, I watched the first 3 or 4 Washington games, the all 22, watching Gibson. And it honestly, he reminded me of Joe Mixon. It's crazy, his maturation coming into the pros this past year and how quickly he picked things up as a runner. It was unbelievable. I mean, we always knew he was a great pass catcher, and it's kind of weird that J.D. McKissick ended up being the guy as a pass catcher there. But yeah, man, Gibson, I think you can make an argument that, Taylor is the RB1, but I think between Akers and Dobbins and Clyde, Gibson definitely deserves to be in that conversation with Swift, especially if he gets unlocked as a pass catcher, which, we know he can do.
Yeah, definitely. I think, sorry, Ty, yeah. What is it they say in Dumb and Dumber? No erases or something like that. Personally, no erases. Do you guys want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Yes.
No, I will not put any listener through that. Yeah, it's classic movie, all-timer. But yeah, to kind of get into that class a little bit, Graham, we're going to run through a couple of these guys and kind of ask you a couple of nitty-gritty questions as well. And we're going to start with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like you said, we saw him rise into damn near top 10 running back status as far as draft capital towards the end of the draft season, especially after Damien Williams went out as well. We obviously didn't get that consistency that we really wanted. We didn't really see many spiked weeks necessarily either. I think his highest point total was just under 21 points. I'm wondering, do you see the running back one upside that people were hoping for from Clyde, or do you think those expectations might be a little bit lofty based on how that Chiefs offense is using him?
Yeah, I think one of the things I expected more of was a little bit more passing down work. And, maybe it's just because they have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. There's no reason for them to throw to running backs because, throwing to receivers and tight ends just in general is more efficient, but especially when you have probably the two best position players at their respective positions. So, yeah, Edwards-Helaire, what's weird is Edwards-Helaire's floor was fine. Like, he was consistently giving you 10, 12, 11 points, but obviously where you drafted him most likely was at the back end of the first round. That's not going to get it done. I think the biggest takeaway is like these running backs on very, very pass-heavy teams, like the Bills too. They're just it's really hard for these guys to get it done unless they're getting 5, 6, 7 targets. And Edwards-Helaire had a few games like that. Yeah, Joe Mixon, exactly. Yeah, the Bengals were one of the most pass-heavy teams in the league. Edwards-Helaire only had 5 games this year where he saw 5 or more targets. His biggest games were actually back in week 1 when he got 25 carries against the Texans and 0 targets. And then he had, a huge game on the ground against the Bills. And I think Andy Reid just found a way to expose that Bills run defense. But yeah, Edwards-Helaire, I still think he still has like low end RB1 upside, but I think myself included, we were all a little bit too sold on the ceiling because when they get in close, man, like it's Kelce and Hill, it's Mahomes running, speed options. Like after week 1 where he got, 6, 7 inside carries inside the 10-yard line, he didn't have a game where he saw more than 2. And frankly, most of those games, he only got like 1 or nothing. So the touchdown upside, I think, was a little bit overstated for him. And I think his lack of passing down usage was probably not where I expected, and maybe a little bit overstated too, just because Kelce and Hill are that good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of the camp that I was in, and definitely not tooting my horn or anything because I still love Clyde. And Ty, you remember the great JT versus Clyde debate of 2020, of course. I'm not rubbing that in or anything, but yeah, I think what you said, Graham, is that like those weapons and the way Patrick Mahomes will always have somebody open downfield, I think limits the dump off necessity for that offense. Yep. And I was actually surprised to see the carry volume that they were willing to give him when they were giving them those 20 plus games. That was pretty unexpected for me. So, yeah, I think I'm kind of with you in that his upside is probably back end just because of that target volume. I was looking back a little bit, and Andy Reid with the Chiefs, the most targeted running back he's had was Jamal Charles with just over 100 targets in like his second year coaching the team, and that was with Alex Smith. But since then, even Kareem Hunt's big year, I think he only got like 63 targets. So definitely that's where I tempered my expectations a little bit, but I really hope he can reach that because the 180 carries is really a solid floor for him to work with if he can get more than those 55 targets that he got this year. So I think that's really, really well put there. And I'm curious to see where, as far as the dynasty perspective, you would have him among those other running backs. Would you say that he is so you got your JT, your James Robinson, all these guys that we're definitely going to get into a little bit more, but would you say he's more towards like the front of that group of rookies, or would you say he's maybe towards the back of that tier?
Yeah, now it's hard to go against Taylor. We only have like a 6-game sample, but I think Taylor is probably going to be the consensus one. I think Swift, Dobbins, and Akers will probably be ahead of Edwards-Helaire too. I think Edwards-Helaire is right there behind Taylor still. Yeah. This is still a great Chiefs offense, man. And like you said, they had a couple of games this year where Edwards-Helaire was getting, 16, 18, 20 carries. The touchdowns are going to come. They have to come because this offense is just going to give them so many layup opportunities. And the good thing about Edwards-Helaire too is obviously he was a first-round pick. He's going to have the 5th-year option. So theoretically, the Chiefs will pick up that 5th-year option unless he gets hurt or just is, not very good. He will be on the Chiefs guaranteed for the next 4 seasons after this year. So you got that baked in too. And I'm just not going to bet against this Chiefs offense. Even if he gets 220 carries, 65, 70 targets in a season, like he's going to have some big touchdown years just because this offense gives gives so many opportunities.
Yeah, no, I like that for sure. And like you said, 225 carries and like 70 targets is like, that is a solid running back one volume for sure. So,
and he would have gotten there too. I mean, he only played 13 games. Obviously, he got hurt late in the year. He missed a game early in the year because of COVID or whatever. He would have gotten that, just about that 220 target or 220 carries and 7 targets or so.
For sure. It's also going to be interesting to see if they try to add to that position too, just with, the previous year they wanted Carlos Hyde to be kind of a second fiddle to Damian Williams or whatever. And then they brought Le'Veon Bell in to be that veteran presence as kind of a secondary runner. So I'm very curious to see that offseason in the running back room for the Chiefs. I do want to get into probably like, not my highest ranked, but probably my favorite running back out of these rookies. And you mentioned him before. That would be J.K. Dobbins. Yeah. We affectionately refer to him as the Dobb Goblin. That hasn't caught on yet, but it's gonna, I'm telling you.
Love it.
He obviously smashed yards created at Ohio State. He's the only player in school history to reach 2,000 rushing yards in a season. Had a pretty solid rookie season in Baltimore versus what it looked like in the first half. And I guess kind of what we thought, like I definitely thought it was going to be a messy split in that backfield. And it turned out that way until the latter half when it was just him and Gus there. But it still kind of seems like even though Mark Ingram was released, Gus Edwards is a restricted free agent. It still seems like JK is fighting the situation a little bit in that he's not really going to get the target volume. Lamar obviously takes a lot of the rushing volume. And then it looks like the team does want a second guy in there with Gus getting a lot of run as well. So I'm curious, Graham, like what's your take on Dobbins and how this Ravens backfield is going to unfold moving into 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I drafted 2 years ago now. I drafted Mark Ingram in the 5th round, pretty much every chance I could get him, just because, Lamar Jackson and running quarterbacks in general just kind of unlock running backs, in a lot of different ways. It just makes it's an extra angle defenses have to carry, have to account for. A lot of the times you'll see, especially with the read option becoming a huge part and zone read becoming a huge part of the NFL with these running quarterbacks, it freezes the second level defenders. And I knew coming in, like Dobbins was perfect for that type of scheme. And like you mentioned, early in the year, Mark Ingram was still playing a ton. We kind of had a 3-headed backfield. I stayed away from Dobbins this past year just because, it was going to the 6th round of drafts most of the time. And Ingram and Edwards. Edwards is a phenomenal back. Like he's been so underrated, I think, especially for that offense. But Ingram's gone now. Edwards is a I think he only signed a 1-year deal, so they're probably going to bring in a second fiddle. I think Dobbins kind of profiles now as that 2019 Mark Ingram. Like he's going to get the 220 carries probably, and he's going to get a ton of red zone work because, like we saw late in the year and especially against softer opponents, this Ravens offense can really move the ball efficiently and in a hurry. I think Dobbins will, at least for the next 3 seasons, have, the upside for 1,100, 1,200 yards and double-digit scores just because, it's kind of like, the Chiefs effect, like we were just talking about. There's going to be a lot of opportunities inside the 10 for scoring. And I hope one of the things that I'm kind of crossing my fingers with is they work with Lamar on checking down a little bit more because Dobbins, when he got the ball as a pass catcher this year, was electric. Like there were some huge chunk gains, and I'm really hoping they get with Lamar about adding that as another layer to this offense because it could really help Lamar. Not only just with the checkdowns and just being more efficient and taking what the defense is giving him, but I mean, Dobbins is just so good after the catch. I mean, I think we need to see Dobbins get, at least 40 to 50 targets because, that's something that this role as it's designed has not given us yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's super funny too. I was looking at some Dobbins earlier and he was actually top 10 in running back slot snaps, but he only got 3 targets on all that slot work. So that's even separate from the checkdowns of him coming out of the backfield. But I'm totally with you. Like, I think what we're hoping for is 2019 Mark Ingram plus a little bit more explosiveness, right? Because if you look at Mark Ingram from that year, he only had a 10% explosive play rate, and J.K. Dobbins this year had a 14% explosive play rate, which on more volume, that could come down a little bit. But if you can keep that rolling on more volume, I think Mark Ingram's line was 200 carries for just over 1,000 1,010 touchdowns, I think J.K. Dobbins on the same volume could increase that production, as well as, like you said, maybe a couple more checkdowns. So that's definitely what I'm hoping for out of Dobbins, even with Gus Edwards in there. Like, I think if you look at Gus Edwards, the guy's had between 130 and 145 carries every season of his career, and just a little bit over 700 rushing yards every season of his career. So that's great for Gus Edwards to be one of those spot start flex guys, still alongside Dobbins being a really strong running back too, with that touchdown upside to be like a top 5 running back. So I am all over Dobbins. I took him in those 6 rounds last year and took a big hit in like early season. And I thought he would probably pay off a little bit more than he did, but he paid off really well towards that back half. And so I'm pretty encouraged on those dynasty teams where I got him, just because that rushing floor and like you said, the red zone work's going to be massive. So loving some Dob Goblin over here.
Yeah, Dobbins, I came into last summer saying like Dobbins is the most underrated dynasty asset, just because, man, I mean, like there's potential for him to have like seasons where he's averaging 5.5, 5.6, 5.7 yards per carry. I mean, he averaged 6 yards per carry this year. You know, granted, it was 130 carries. He's not going to do that again, but like the efficiency is just going to be absurd with Dobbins for the next couple of years.
Tell them about the rule, Ty.
Yeah, I was calling it the Jackson 5, because basically what you're getting at is how much built-in efficiency you have behind some of these mobile quarterbacks. Somebody as talented as Lamar Jackson, you're going to get like a 5-yard per carry floor for whoever the running back is behind there, because I definitely am on the same page. The only thing I worry about is that we all love Dobbins. Everyone on the planet loves Dobbins. So if he was to start going as high as a Jonathan Taylor or something in a startup, you know, he is capped in that pass catching department. I want to see the checkdowns increase as well, but they have to like double for them to be anything of substance. Almost it's that low in Baltimore, and even the overall passing volume. But I totally agree with you guys that this guy's going to score double-digit rushing touchdowns, and you know, maybe there is room for a couple outliers in that top 12 at the running back position, because we know Derrick Henry is already one of those guys.
Yeah, no doubt.
Speaking of outliers, guys, maybe that's where I'll go here, Trav, because I wanted to bring up the 2 outliers from the 2020 class. The first one is James Robinson. I just want to run down a list here super quick. This is the highest scoring running backs in points per game over the last decade for rookie running backs. Saquon, number 1, Zeke, number 2, Alvin Kamara, number 3, Doug Martin, number 4, Kareem Hunt, number 5. And if I just pause there really quick, the muscle hamster was a bit before yards created's inception. The other 4 just smashed in yards created, just so everyone out there knows. And then next after those guys, we arrive at the 6th highest scoring rookie running back in the last decade in points per game, and that's James Robinson. So, Graham, he'll have a hard time seeing as many opportunities as he did this year, but we also think the Jaguars' offense is on the rise. So where do you think you're going to land on Robinson heading into 2021?
Yeah, you know, I think I'm with you. I think the Jags this past year just, you know, they did what they had to do. You know, they played really slow on offense and just played, you know, very balanced. You know, now they'll get Lawrence and they'll be a lot more pass heavy. One of the things that I was most surprised about with Robinson is like, you know, I didn't do a yards credit profile on him because he was, you know, so low end and kind of buried on that depth chart. I mean, truly one of the coolest outliers I think we've seen in fantasy a long time. One of the things I was most surprised about is how good of a pass catcher he was. So I'm excited to see how Urban uses him, if Urban uses him in you know, kind of a high-ish volume passing down role, because last season with, you know, Chris Thompson missing pretty much the whole back half of the year, you know, Robinson was getting a consistent 10, 12, 13% target share. And obviously we saw Trevor Lawrence you know, check down quite a bit and, you know, do a lot of design plays with Travis Etienne there in Clemson. So I think the big question we'll have to answer with Robinson is just how involved he'll be in the passing game. And if the Jags add another back, I mean, Robinson clearly proved he can be, you know, a very good inside zone runner. And I think, you know, this Jags offense is going to be perfectly designed for them to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, and he's going to see a lot of light boxes as a result. But I think that the biggest question with Robinson we'll have to answer this coming year is just how involved he's going to continue to be as a pass catcher, and if they add another back for that competition.
Totally. And just for our listeners, I love these kind of conversations about outliers, and I keep thinking of random yards created stuff, but identifying outliers, that's a huge part of fantasy football, right? And in a totally different context, it reminded me of a 2016 yards created piece on Derrick Henry. I'm sure listeners could just Google 2016 yards created Derrick Henry and find it. It was a great piece because you kind of called him an outlier way back when. And I think it's funny because he had one of the stranger yards created profiles you'll ever see because he was so good on outside runs, off tackle, blah, blah, blah. And then now with the power of hindsight, his NFL story's been pretty much the same. It's really funny on how well he's run off tackle and stuff like that in Tennessee. Totally off point because James Robinson is an outlier for different reasons. I mean, he's an outlier in terms of just being an undrafted free agent. I'm not sure you could have found the film to do yards created on him too much. It'd be a tough sell. Speaking of which, the number 2 outlier I wanted to point out was Antonio Gibson. We alluded to him a little bit before. So were you just not able to do a solid study because of the small sample size? Was it that he was used as a wide receiver too much? Or is it in fact, Graham, because he would have broken the yards created model?
Yeah, well, he essentially did. I mean, he only got 33 carries last year and he averaged like 1 million yards per attempt. But I did watch, just for the hell of it, I watched all of his carries last year. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but he would have led this class in missed tackles forced per attempt. And, it'll be interesting because I'm excited to see Kenneth Gainwell. Greg Cosell mentioned him to me earlier. Like, Cosell is just a maniac, man. Like, he's already watched all of Kenneth Gainwell's carries from last year, I'm sure. But
he's like the Memphis offensive line of tape breakdown. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. They have just been churning out running backs. But yeah, Gibson is man. I think I don't know, man. I'm really excited for Antonio Gibson just because we knew how good of a pass catcher he was. We knew how explosive as a pass catcher he was. They started about middle of the year. They started using him a little bit more as a wideout, like motioning him out and giving him like legit like Austin Eckler type split out wide. You're going to run a route against a DB type of stuff. They did it against the Ravens, and I think all three of his first catches were all on crossing routes, and I think they all gained like 15 or more yards. I feel like we're going to see Washington unlock Gibson this coming year because, he had to answer the question, can he be a predominant inside runner? And I think I said this earlier too. I think he reminded me of Joe Mixon, like right off the bat early in the year in terms of his movement ability, in terms of his decisiveness behind the line of scrimmage, behind that offensive line. And his one cut ability is just so sick. Like, I am so excited for Gibson, man. Like, he is, I think he's going to be huge. And honestly, like, I think I said this earlier too, but I think he deserves to be in that conversation with Swift and Dobbins and Akers and kind of that like second tier. I still have Clyde at the top of that second tier, but I think he still deserves to be, I think Gibson deserves to be well within that conversation, like his very, very similar assets in Dynasty.
So I think we're naming the guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Antonio Gibson are going to be the 2 that I target out of those rookie running backs because a lot of the other guys, yeah, they're going to go at cost and stuff. I think we might be able to get small discounts because Gibson really does look like a good bet. Even if you listen to some of the post-draft press conference comments that we heard out of Washington, they want to use this guy like a Christian McCaffrey light, and he's huge. Like, people don't give him credit for how big this guy is. He is. It reminds me of Joe Mixon, where people didn't realize how big Joe Mixon was. Like, they're doing what little guys do at that huge size.
Yeah, man, I'm with you on Gibson and Edwards-Helaire because we've already started cranking out, working on best ball ranks, and I think Gibson and Edwards-Helaire are probably going to be my 2 main targets from the rookie class, just because Taylor and Dobbins and Akers, especially Akers with his last 5-6 games, they're all going to go a little bit higher than maybe they should. But even though, all 3 of those guys could easily pay off.
Yeah, I think we're talking about a lot of RB2s here for sure. So moving away from the impressive 2020 running back class, there's some former yards created superstars we want to ask you about because we've seen them in the pros now. And while the talent has definitely translated with some of these guys, we want to know about their fantasy value going forward because there is some stigmas associated with these running backs. So Josh Jacobs is the first guy. and one of the better force missed tackles per attempts ever coming out of college, and a spectacular pass catching profile coming out. In the NFL, Jacobs has proven to be one of the more elusive running backs in the game, particularly during his rookie season. Now we have 2 years of him in the pros with the Raiders. This season, he experienced a slight increase in pass catching, but for running back one purposes, the pass catching has not been there as of yet. So, Graham, do you think Jacobs will get that work under Gruden? And if not, should we adjust our perceptions a bit? Like, is he capped for fantasy?
Yeah, he's definitely capped. In terms of missed tackles forced, and just like, you look at some of the advanced stuff that, he's done coming into the league, it's totally a statement on yards created. I mean, Jacobs was second in the class behind only David Montgomery in missed tackles forced per attempt back in 2019. He's been super efficient, but he's like the most game script dependent running back. I think maybe outside of Derrick Henry, he's probably more game script dependent than Derrick Henry even. I think all but one of his career touchdowns have came in wins. When the Raiders win, Josh Jacobs scores touchdowns. Actually, 2 of his touchdowns have not come in wins. So 2 of his 19 career rushing touchdowns have come in losses. The other 17 have come in wins. And I mean, I just think, with the way this offense is built with Gruden and the way that he uses his receivers, it's really Darren Waller getting that 22-25% target share every single week. And then after that, they spread the ball around. It just depends on, hey, maybe this is a Hunter Renfrow game where we're in a lot of, 3rd and 5s, and Renfrow ends up getting 6 or 7 targets. I just, the Raiders are a very week-to-week team in terms of their game plan. And I think what we've seen with Jacobs, he saw more consistent target volume this year, which was great. He's getting, the previous year he was only getting 1 or 2 targets per game. This past year he was getting 3 or 4. So we saw a little bit of a boost, but we're not ever going to see the full blown big target share that we want to see, because coming out of college, Josh Jacobs I thought was a fantastic receiver. I thought that was his calling card coming out, and now we've kind of seen him turn into this kind of game script dependent grinder. I hope that the Raiders unlock him in the passing game, but I'm definitely not holding my breath for it, because, after Waller, I mean, I think they just kind of, they have a lot of different guys that they get the ball to.
Yeah, and can't forget about my boy Nelson Aguilar, right, Ty?
Look at Aguilar being a baller after he leaves the Eagles.
Yeah, dude, he's fucking good. And we talked about it. We actually covered a little bit of Nelson Aguilar, which is saying something in itself. But yeah, I mean, when the guy's got no defenders within 5 yards of him, he's a good ball tracker. But if he's got a guy that's within even 2 strides, he's fucked.
Go for it, Graham.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just gonna say, it's we're trying to build in some assumption irrational coaching on a team with Gruden and Derek Carr. It's really hard because targets aren't going to go to Ruggs. They're going to go to Aguilar. And, there's a lot of tight end to running back target correlations that we could go into too, where if you have a Darren Waller on the team, it's hard to get your running back targets. But just to Graham's point, I can't believe, because he's the most dangerous catching balls out of the backfield. So it's mystifying that they don't want to use him in that facet of the game.
Yeah. I was just going to say, it's to your point, it's crazy that, they draft Henry Ruggs where they draft him over, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, and Nelson freaking Aguilar ends up being the number 1 wide receiver.
That's pretty rigorous.
Yeah, credit to Aguilar though. He was pretty damn good this year. Honestly, really, he was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of turned into a Deshaun Jackson type, which I didn't really expect. I mean, he was a super high ADOT, high variance guy, which I didn't see that coming. Yeah,
definitely not something I'm going to be putting my house on happening again. That's for sure.
Ooh.
So we're going to get into another one of my previous favorites that we actually talked a bunch about already is Joe Mixon. It's a really curious case, and it's almost similar to Josh Jacobs in that he is seemingly perpetually under-targeted, consistently overhyped at draft season. Maybe not necessarily overhyped, because I think there is some good process in there, but I think his hype is better than the production that we see. That's for damn sure. We definitely like the wide receivers in that Zach Taylor offense, especially with Joe Burrow. Hopefully he can make a clean recovery from that nasty injury because we love seeing him and he looked like a stud. But what about the other Joe, Graham? Do you think Joe Mixon is also capped by his situation, or do you think there's a little bit of room for that to evolve in his favor?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, we only got 6 games out of Mixon this year. The first couple, we just saw him in the same role where he was getting, his normal 16, 17, 18, 19 carries. Then in weeks 4 and 5, they finally started using him on like every single passing down snap. He became like a true bell cow where he was getting, 75, 80% of the carries. Yeah. And then he played the Colts and he got hurt. And then the Bengals lied about the injury all year long and said, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that serious. And we never see him again. I honestly don't have a strong Mixon take because I'm with you. I think last year I ended up not drafting him as much as I thought I would. He was going in the back end of the first round. And at that point, I was either taking Miles Sanders, Devontae Adams. Those were my 2 guys at the back end of the first round. So I really didn't end up with a lot of Mixon. I think this year we'll finally see him come down in cost. And I haven't done any, drafts for 2021 or anything like that, but I think we'll probably see him come in at like the late second round-ish range, hopefully, with a couple of these receivers going ahead of him. And I think at that point, Mixon's going to be a buy. We'll have to see what Joe Burrow's rehab is like and what his timetable looks like. But I think Mixon is going to be a pretty strong buy, both in season long and in Dynasty, because he's going to have a full off season to recover. Obviously the Bengals went full tank mode again this year. Yeah. I think Mixon is going to be a pretty strong buy. And, when he came out, he was really young. I mean, the dude is only 24 years old. He's only gonna be 25 in July. Like he's still got 2 to 3 years of potential, ceiling like production. So I'm excited to see where Mixon comes in at, because I think I might be really overweight on him in 2021 drafts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Ty, you can attest to the fact that was music to my ears, talking by Joe Mixon.
But he is the poster boy of yards created. I wasn't expecting a much different answer, to be honest. But I just, to Graham's credit, like that's somebody who you really went to bat for when it was very like it's easy to forget how there was a lot of other names that were being bantied about alongside of Joe Mixon, and it's not like Joe Mixon isn't a borderline elite running back even for fantasy. It's just we just want that next step. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Come on, Zach Taylor. Come on.
Well, thinking of that scheme, it gets me down another yards created rabbit hole. Like that's why I love yards created. It's super specific, which is super helpful. Like Graham, you break down the numbers for these running backs in so many different actionable ways. So it shows, for instance, how a running back does on inside versus off tackle runs, like I referenced with Derrick Henry, and things like that kind of specificity is super helpful for fantasy purposes, identifying a scheme fit for a rookie running back. Once a running back lands in an offense, yards created will have data on how that running back did in a certain scheme or alignment. And that brings me home to Joe Mixon here, because yards created can show us how a running back did running out a shotgun or running out, for example, and, that's, first of all, data we want more and more in today's NFL. But Joe Mixon has a little bit underperformed because he was better than Saquon, better than Zeke out of shotgun. And Joe Mixon's Bengals ran 76% of their plays from shotgun this year. So hopefully he can, because my whole point, Trav, you can attest to, is that he's getting these 1,100 yard rushing seasons. He's getting these 220 yard carry seasons. He just needs that pass catching, and it's all in relation to his ADP. So if his ADP falls, then definitely, like Graham's saying, we can all be overweight on him, because we know that pass catching is always in his range of outcomes. I think it goes back to what Graham said when he was talking there about Mixon, is that we did see Zach Taylor finally, weaponize him in those last couple games before we unceremoniously lost him for the rest of the season. So there's so much upside there. We just need the cost to come down so we can harness that upside.
And so we can get a little bit of profit out of the price that we're going to pay for him, right? Because we really were just breaking even on cost with Joe Mixon. And like you said, Ty, if we can add some of that Gio Bernard pass catching work on top of those 1,100 yard seasons for Mixon, maybe a little bit more efficiency on that high carry total or whatever. But I'm I'm in still. And speak for yourselves, guys, because I'm already overweight on Joe Mixon. I don't know if I can handle anymore.
He's finally slipping. Like, you can finally get him at a palatable cost in Dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
and
definitely
in trades for sure too. Like,
yeah, I'm definitely going to try to be buying. Yeah.
I like
so
it. Okay,
I'm going to take it
to the next one. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of the other side of the coin here. So this is a guy I think could possibly be overrated, but I have two questions here. So I want to bring up David Montgomery. He was a running back I wanted to ask you for one specific reason. Like, feel free to weigh in on where you stand on David Montgomery for fantasy, but he's had a pretty underwhelming career until the back half of this season before he tore it up against that strength of schedule. Even broke a few long runs, guys. But what I want to ask is he's hovering near the NFL league lead in broken tackles since coming into the league. And I imagine he scored really well. I think he was number one in his class in forced missed tackles, you mentioned, above Josh Jacobs in that class. But how do you weigh the athleticism and testing numbers against some of the data when you're evaluating running backs?
Yeah, it's always, it'll be interesting this year because we don't have the combine. It'll be interesting to see what the numbers look like because the pro day numbers are always a little screwy. I think it's always a part of the process. Like, you want to see athletes be good at athletics. I mean, it's really it. And then 40-yard dash times are on the surface pretty garbage, but if you adjust for weight, it becomes a little bit more predictive, I think, at the running back position, we really only have like two metrics between weight adjusted 40 and 3-cone, even if it has like the slightest little positive correlation. Everything else is kind of useless. So I know Montgomery was not like a combine freak or anything like that, but I mean, when he came out, he's always been great at forcing missed tackles. He's always been very elusive at fighting through contact, but I mean, his one cut ability is always been really strong. I think for fantasy this past year, the final 6-7 games of the year, I mean, he was basically the RB1 and he ran so freaking hot with his schedule. I mean, the Packers, Lions, Texans, Vikings, Jaguars, faced the Packers again in week 17. All of those teams were bottom 10 in terms of EPA allowed on the ground. Like, they were just garbage front sevens. And I think it can be a little bit of both. Like, Montgomery definitely is hitting a stride in his career, and he definitely hit a stride at the end of the last year. But it's also certainly strength of schedule played a big part of him finally being the producer that we saw. I think my thing with Montgomery for 2021 in fantasy, getting away from like the yards created stuff, is like, what is Tariq Cohen's health going to be? Because he tore his ACL, and after that, it was Montgomery playing pretty much every single snap. I mean, they played Cordarrelle Patterson a little bit in the backfield, but other than that, I mean, it was Montgomery playing 80% of the snaps. And if Cohen's coming back and he's going to be, 80 to 90% of his former self, like, we're not going to see Montgomery in the true bell cow, like every down snap role. And he's not going to face the softest schedule in the NFL once again. So I think Montgomery is going to be a big candidate to be overdrafted. And I'm really interested to see where he goes in drafts here soon.
Totally. And I think that's perfect what you said. Like, it can be both. I think that's perfect. It's not something that I've even thought of a lot because he has made improvements, especially not spending too much time behind the line of scrimmage and things like that. He has made a lot of improvements. So I think that was really well answered. Like, it can be both. And I think he can be overdrafted still, even if I shift my mentality, because it's going to be really hard for him to repeat on the level of opportunity he had this year. And it goes back to what you said, like, Tariq Cohen, I think even if Tariq Cohen's not back or he's not healthy, maybe it's Cordarrelle Patterson. I think they will have somebody like David Montgomery almost underwhelmed this year in that one aspect, because I thought he might be one of those guys who was a better pass catcher than anything else when it comes to what I liked about him coming out of college. But he didn't impress me as much as I was hoping in that facet of the game. And it just reminds me of a great tweet you had one time, Graham, and I can't remember it, but it was something like, 150 carries plus 80 catches is better than 250 carries. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And it's just, it could be one of those things with David Montgomery. The more pass catching I envision for him next year, the higher I'll be on him.
Yeah, that was actually a tweet, Austin Eckler versus Josh Jacobs, because that was like a big debate in PPR this year. It was Jacobs versus Eckler. And obviously Eckler got hurt, but I mean, in the games that Eckler played, he scored more fantasy points per game as a receiver than Alvin freaking Kamara did. That's crazy. When Eckler played with Herbert, he was a higher scoring fantasy running back as a receiver than Alvin Kamara was. And I mean, it just goes to show, I mean, and if you play in PPR, like these guys are such cheat codes, both with their floors and ceilings. But yeah, with Montgomery, it's going to be interesting to see how much he plays with on passing downs with Cohen getting back to full health this coming year.
Yeah, Tariq Cohen definitely commands the targets with how electric he is. I've been kind of in the same camp too, where I've been pretty hesitant on David Montgomery. I think like we saw that big production with that schedule coming from a mile away. And I think even with that big production, like I don't like to get into this where you say if you take away this play and that play, he did this. But honestly, like there was a couple of those games where a really big play was a big part of that huge rushing total. And I just don't see him as like a regular big playmaker necessarily, where he's going to have those pop-off games, unless, like you guys said, if he gets that pass-catching work that Tariq Cohen could leave behind. So that was, I would agree, that's very well put on Monty. He's just a polarizing guy in general. Like people love him. Most of the True North chat just dogs on him. But it's definitely a fun conversation to have for sure. So I'm going to get into actually somebody who I very overzealously planted my flag in last year, let's just say, as an under the radar breakout running back in 2020. And that would be Damien Harris. Like I said, I definitely overestimated what he was going to produce for fantasy. I knew Cam was going to take some of that red zone work, but Cam had like 43 carries in the red zone, and his share inside the 5 was just like crazy. So Cam basically took all of that work away, which was more than I anticipated. But it is looking, Graham, like that situation could clear up a little bit. James White is a free agent, and he's going to leave a lot of targets behind. I'm not saying those directly go to Damien Harris, but there is definitely potential for that path to clear up. Do you think that Harris could become something, maybe what I was hoping for before 2020? Or do you think he's somebody who could be overdrafted with people seeing that situation clear up a little bit?
Yeah, how wild is it that Cam had 8 passing touchdowns this year? Just 8. He also had 12. He had 12 rushing touchdowns. It's freaking crazy, man. I don't know if we've ever seen a season like that.
I don't know either.
No, that is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's going to be the biggest thing with him, man. It's like, we talked a little bit about Lamar earlier. How much is Damien going to be involved in the passing game? Because, coming out, he played with Jalen Hurts at Alabama, and, he didn't get a lot of passing down volume then, but when he did, he looked pretty good on it. And, this past year, he got nothing. I mean, it was just strictly, he was in the Sony Michel role where he was getting, all the early down stuff. And, like you mentioned, because of Cam, not getting a lot of red zone stuff. I was with you on Harris in best ball. Like he, especially early in best ball, like in July and August, he was going like the 13th or 14th round. And that was just like an auto pick for me. And,
sure.
He missed the first 3 games, got a little bit unlucky there, but, the Patriots just could not move the ball efficiently. I mean, Cam, after the first couple of games this past year, was just, he was abysmal. It was really hard to watch. I really don't have a strong Damien Harris take. I think he'll probably end up going, 8th, 9th round, and it'll really just depend on what they do at quarterback and what their, if Josh McDaniels stays, like what their offense looks like. I mean, there's so much up in the air with the Patriots right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like you tapped into it there. It's very dependent for me on who the quarterback is, right?
Yep.
If Cam is still there, that carry total inside the 20, 43.3% of the team's carries inside the 20, 73.1 inside the 5. He had 19 carries. Damien Harris only had 3 inside the 5. So I think what we're hoping for is for Cam to get the fuck out and Damien Harris to get some of those red zone carries, because I think on top of that, he does have some room for some some touchdown regression, because he did have 19 carries inside the 20, but only 1 touchdown. So that is what we want to see. And that's kind of what I was banking on, because I knew with James White, he wasn't necessarily going to get all that passing work. So if that could start coming, kind of much like David Montgomery, if that starts coming, that's where we might start seeing some ceiling that we can rely on. But I think a lot of it's going to hinge on Cam. So that's kind of where I'm sitting for Damien Harris, but I'm still very hopeful for it, because I think he's personally a really good, really talented player. And just the way the Patriots have historically used their running backs is pretty conducive, if you're not Sony Michel, to fantasy production.
Sony Michel, man, he was so good coming out.
He looked decent when he came back this year, I'll be honest. Like, he had a couple of big plays.
He did. Honestly, he did. He looked the closest to his Georgia self that I had ever seen. Sure. But man, I mean, that first spring training he had as a rookie, he got hurt again. He hurt his knee, and I was like, oh Jesus, like, because he had really bad knee and ankle problems coming out of Georgia, and yeah, man, he's just not panned out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I was looking at explosive play percentage earlier. I was talking about it for J.K. Dobbins. Damien Harris had a 15% explosive play percentage. Sony Michel had a 15% explosive play percentage this year. So if he's listening, he should put that on a plaque somewhere. Because that's
all that was missing, in the first couple of years.
Exactly.
Just the breaking off those long runs. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. Take it away, Ty.
Well, if David Montgomery can do it, I say Sony can too. I think my only contribution to that conversation would be that I don't chase the Patriots goal line back. I never have. I never will in fantasy. I agree that if he's going outside the top 6 rounds, then best ball is where I always am more attracted to a Patriots running back. But I also am more attracted to the pass catching Patriots running back always. So I think that could be even like a JJ Nelson or something. Or is it JJ Taylor? I always get those guys.
JJ Taylor.
But
the JJs.
But yeah, I think I just worry there'll be a lot of people who are higher on Damien Harris than I am, for sure. Where was I going to go? Was I going to ask about some league trend kind of stuff to finish out, Trav? Is that
yeah, and just like the scoring that we've seen in 2020.
So basically, Graham, I wanted to ask you, what do you think's going on with the quarterback position? We saw a ton of 350-plus point scores at the position, more than we had in the past half decade combined this year. Most passing touchdowns of all time, about the most rushing touchdowns of all time by quarterbacks by about 40. Do you think this is sort of an outlier season, or do you think it's going to be a changing of a guard? Do we have to start drafting quarterbacks a little bit earlier if we want one of those explosive seasons?
Yeah. So it's a changing in the guard in the sense that this is the way the game is trending. I mean, we are going to continue to see, especially with a lot of these young quarterbacks coming in with Lawrence and Fields, we're going to see a lot more rushing production just naturally coming into the game. I mean, a lot of these guys coming in from like even high school, I mean, they've been trained as RPO quarterbacks where we're going to space you out. You're going to make one read, and if it's not there, you're going to run basically. This is the new NFL. 100%. This is the new NFL, and that's basically what Kyler Murray is. I mean, he's a one read, and if it's not there, I'm going to run quarterback, and it works amazingly for fantasy. I think this is something JJ Zacharyson has touched on, and he is obviously the legendary late round quarterback guy.
Next week's guest.
Yeah, we got him coming on next week. Cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, can't wait. There you go. You'll have to ask him the same question because I'm interested to see what he says too. But
we're asking everybody this one.
Yeah, man. I think it's going to start trending towards, and this is something I adjusted for this past year. It's going to start trending towards like kind of like a middle round quarterback type of thing. Because my top 2 quarterbacks this year for my teams were I wanted Josh Allen or I wanted Dak Prescott at a discount. Obviously Prescott didn't work out because he got hurt, but it would have worked out. I mean, it 100% would have worked out. I liked Kyler.
It still worked out.
Yes, exactly. I liked Kyler too, but he was always going just a little bit ahead of where I wanted to go. But yeah, I think, broadly this past year, because of COVID, we saw defenses, man, they really rely on communication. And in the off season, and you get all those reps in the off season between just kind of the normal walkthrough stuff before you start putting the pads on in training camp. And then you get the actual training camp reps. I think we saw early in the year, I mean, overs were just getting completely obliterated because defenses just had no answers. I mean, how many times did we see the Saints blow a coverage? And by the end of the year, that was completely stopped. I mean, the Saints were one of the top 5 secondaries in the league again. I mean, early in the year, we really saw defenses struggling, and I think it all came down to communication. Like, they just didn't have the reps like they normally would. So I think that was a big part of the reason we saw quarterback scoring explode. I mean, I think that was a part of the reason Russell Wilson had such a monster first half of the year, and then teams started figuring out that passing offense and basically figuring out, hey, Russell Wilson's going to throw deep, 20% of the time, and we can play cover 3 and just try to take it away. I think this year was an outlier year in the way that defenses just didn't have the time to prep it. And overall perspective, like, running quarterbacks are 100% where you have to look for your fantasy quarterback, because at this point, like, Tom Brady threw nearly 40 touchdowns this year, whatever it was. I mean, I think he almost threw 40 touchdowns, and he was basically like a back end. Yeah, he threw exactly 40 touchdowns, I think, actually. 40, yeah. He was basically a back end QB1, and he doesn't run the ball. I mean, that's what we're looking at. You've got to have somebody like Aaron Rodgers who throws 50 touchdowns and barely basically runs to have a top 5, top 6 quarterback if you don't have a running guy.
Totally. You need like almost that 4,500 yards plus 35 passing touchdowns or 40 touchdowns.
It's crazy, man.
4,000. It really is. And I think you hit on so many good things there. Number one, I think what we're getting from a lot of these smart people like yourself is that we're seeing this bottleneck effect where it is kind of it's just a manifestation of what we've seen from the game with the quarterbacks. And this year it seemed to spill over, probably because of, in large part, a lack of that continuity that no defense was able to have. So much coaching turnover in flux with that. So many good points there. And I think what we'll end up doing is kind of what you alluded to. Like, we'll go to the back end of those tiers like you did with Josh Allen. And you identify the guys that have a similar profile, have that upside, but you're getting at a round or 2 discount in your fantasy draft. So I think that's what we're going to do this year for sure. The question I had about the running back position was, like, what I do is I find what happened this year. I look at the hit rates and everything. Then I find the last 10-year average. I find the last 5-year average. But I also like to do the last 5-year average versus the previous 5-year average to find all those trends, right? So one of them that kind of pops out at the running back position is, not only running backs hitting at a bit of a younger age at this point, making something like yards created much more important in this day and age, but I'm also noticing that efficiency is kind of starting to balance out the volume is king narrative. So do you think this will always be a conversation in fantasy that goes back to opportunity? Or do you think we can get to a point where efficiency and usage is kind of more important? Because I think of someone like Clyde Helaire, like, if he was just getting split out to the slot and some of the things that we envisioned his usage looking like, then he would have paid off. But instead he got more touches than I think some of us thought and didn't pay off,
Yeah, for sure. Just in terms of like correlation to fantasy points, snaps are always number one. I mean, getting on the field and seeing the ball, I mean, it's so simple, but I mean, I think in analytics, there's just a lot of truth and simplicity. So I still think, getting on the field and being a bell cow is the number one thing that you want to look for in your fantasy running backs. This year was a particularly weird year for bell cow running backs. I mean, we saw Ezekiel Elliott get his normal role, but man, I mean, he was basically a low-end RB2 for most of the year, especially after Dak Prescott. Yeah, especially after Prescott left. I mean, but if you look at it, I mean, in terms of like fantasy points per game, McCaffrey, Kamara, Henry, and Cook were, kind of the top 4 or 5 guys, even though we got only 3 games out of McCaffrey. I mean, those are true bell cow running backs, or they're on the field pretty much regardless of any game situation, maybe outside of Henry. And then after that, it was just honestly, it was just a shit show. I mean, we had like Aaron Jones, who's not a bell cow, James Robinson, who's kind of a bell cow at the end of the year because Chris Thompson got hurt. Then Montgomery, who we discussed, Nick Chubb, who was splitting snaps with Kareem Hunt. Jonathan Taylor was never truly a bell cow. Austin Eckler was amazing with Justin Herbert. Josh Jacobs is the most game scripted punting running back in the league. And then, we had Zeke and all those guys. Like, I still think opportunity is the number one thing. And, you're going to have these outlier years where efficiency matters a ton. Like, I think we talked about it earlier with Mark Ingram. Like, we ran really hot with Mark Ingram 2 years ago as a 5th round pick because he scored 11, 12 times and he had like basically no passing down usage. You're going to have those outlier years, and they're very tough to predict. But by and large, you want the bell cow backs. And, I think with the way the game is trending and how many good running backs there are, we're going to see even more, kind of maybe not true bell cow backs where we get like 67, 70%, 75% of the team snaps, but like, the Derrick Henry types where it's, we can kind of predict based on the game flow, we can kind of predict where the ball is going to go. And, there's just so many good rookie running backs coming in. I think that's kind of where the game's trending. And I think in general, though, opportunity is by far what you want to look at.
Yeah, I love that. And I
really
love, I was going to say, and I just love how you said we're going to have that influx of youth at running back, because running back is, to me, like the sexiest position, my favorite position to stack on teams. Ty, I think you share some of that same sentiment as well. And it's just really good to see it flourish with all that youth. And I think this 2020 class was a big driver of that. And anybody, following Graham's work through yards created throughout the future, definitely make sure you capitalize on using that resource and applying the findings to take that to your fantasy team. And it's bearing out in successful running backs. So that is a wrap. That's all we've got for tonight, Graham. Can't thank you enough for jumping on. This has been a blast and a true honor for both Ty and myself to get you on the pod. Really cool for you to share your insights with us and come up north with us, boys. I know you had the Viper cast last night, and it was a fantastic show as well. So, I hope we were gracious hosts for you, my man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on, guys. This was a lot of fun. We'll have to link back up in the summer once we kind of start getting into the 2021 stuff and chop it up again.
Absolutely. Ty, you got any parting words for Graham or the listeners?
No, we definitely love to have you back on, Graham. If you do like your Tonight Show rounds. When you start getting into yards created, we would just kill to have you back on for sure.
For sure.
Beauty. All right. So thanks to all of our listeners. We really appreciate everybody who's stopping by and hanging out with us. We finished on time today, Ty. So that's a positive for the True North pod. We love that. And then, so anybody who's looking, we've got merch with Viridian Global. Go check them out at viridianglobal.com. The YouTube channel is the TNFF network. And as we mentioned before, we'll be back next week with JJ Zacharyson. So this is a killer run of guests that we've had. So we really appreciate everybody tuning in and all the guests for joining us. So thanks again. We'll talk to you guys next week. Peace.